Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, in our ongoing study in the very first church history ever written by Eusebius. We're going to take a look at pages 263 to 299. We'll finish up chapter 7 and begin chapter 8. Let's go to block 1 and look at the strife and plague in Alexandria. When peace was finally established in Alexandria, Dionysius returned from Caesarea back to Alexandria. But even so, divisions broke out between the faith communities, and those factions even became violent. The main street through Alexandria was even unsafe to travel. In addition, the city became distressed with epidemics and disease. The church in Alexandria had endured persecution, war, and now disease. But to the credit of the believers, they did minister to the sick, even at the risk of catching the disease themselves. In fact, Eusebius says many believers died by ministering toward those who were sick. And those who died in this way, he said the church considered them to be martyrs. In contrast, the secular, non-believing community shunned anyone with a disease out of fear of catching the disease themselves. There's a sharp contrast in the way that people acted during this time between believers and non-believers. Let's look at note 2, the success of Gallienus. He became emperor in early 200s. His wife was a Christian, and so persecution stopped. And Nepos of Egypt was a bishop of Egypt. And he was teaching a literal view of the book of Revelation. He was actually teaching that God's kingdom would be a carnal kingdom on earth. And Dionysius responded in strict confrontation and debate. He said, "This is false doctrine, it must be challenged." Corsican was a disciple of Nepos, and he was continuing the false teaching. So Dionysius of Alexandria was challenging this false doctrine being taught by Nepos and his disciple Corsican. Now, Dionysius on the book of Revelation, he said its interpretation is a mystery. Its author is not John the Apostle, it is John the Elder. He said this because John the Apostle would never identify himself in his writings, and the book is not to be taken literally. There are 2 tombs in Ephesus, and Eusebius said even in the mid-3rd century, you can still see the 2 marked tombs for the 2 separate Johns that were prominent in Ephesus. So Eusebius of Alexandria said his opinion was that the book of Revelation was authored by John the Elder. But his reason is simply because in the Gospel of John, John never mentioned himself. He was always the one who the Lord loved, the one who Christ loved, the one who Jesus loved. But in the book of Revelation, he identifies himself as John. My argument on that position is simply that the book of Revelation is the revelation of Jesus Christ, not the revelation of John. It begins, this is the revelation of Jesus Christ, and it's Jesus Christ who identifies John. And so I have said before, and I'll say it again, I believe the author of the book of Revelation is the Apostle John because of the common theme. The theme of the Gospel of John is New Exodus. The theme of the book of Revelation is New Exodus. So I don't think it's John the Elder. I know that that is a view that's being held by some, but I think it's John the Apostle because of the common theme. So Dionysius, I think he's wrong here, but we are going with this first church history, and Eusebius says that Dionysius of Alexandria believed that the author of the book of Revelation was John the Elder. Let's move on to block 2, and we read that Dionysius of Rome succeeded Xystus as Bishop of Rome, and Paul of Samosata became the Bishop of Antioch. But Paul of Samosata, he held a false Christology, a false doctrine of Christ, by calling Christ merely human. Again, Dionysius of Alexandria wrote a letter to Antioch confronting this issue of Orthodox Christology. A synod of Antioch was called to settle the issue of Orthodox Christology. Many bishops, elders, and deacons attended this commissioned gathering, and Gallienus was the emperor at the time, and after 17 years as bishop, Dionysius of Alexandria died, and Maximus became bishop of Alexandria. Claudius became the next emperor, and eventually, through this conference that was being held in Antioch, the leader of the Christology heresy was excommunicated. Paul of Samosata was excommunicated. Then the Council of Antioch sent letters out to Rome and letters out to Alexandria. Remember, the big three are Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch. So Antioch sent out letters to Rome and to Alexandria, the other two major centers of Christian thought and authority. So the Council of Antioch did reach a decision on Christology. Jesus Christ is co-eternal, co-substantial with the Father. He is fully God, fully man. He is not merely a human. And this was decided at the Council of Antioch. Rome and Alexandria were also contacted. Now take a look at block 2, note 2. Aurelian is succeeded by Probus as emperor. That's 276 to 282. Felix became bishop of Rome. False prophet named Mani rose up, and get this, proclaiming himself to be the Holy Spirit incarnate, the Paraclete, the Parakletos. This was called the Manichaean heresy. He even appointed 12 disciples to himself. And this perversion came out of Persia. So the Manichaean heresy, the church was always confronted by rising up of heresy. Next, we look at the lineage of the churchmen. Eutychian became bishop of Rome, followed by Gaius and Marcellinus. Timonis became bishop of Antioch. Dorotheus became an elder of Antioch who emerged as a great prominent scholar. So Dorotheus was elder of Antioch. Note 4. Tyrannus became bishop of Antioch, and persecutions increased at this time also. Eusebius of Laodicea became bishop of Laodicea. Another Eusebius, there you go, we got another one now. Eusebius of Laodicea, he became bishop of Laodicea. Then Antalius, who was originally from Alexandria, returned to Alexandria to form the school of Aristotelian tradition at Alexandria. So we have the a new school formed in Alexandria, the school of Aristotelian tradition. So then we'll close out block 2 with Anatolius as scholar and humanitarian. A sector of Alexandria was the city of Percuum. It was under siege by Rome, and the soldiers cut off the supply lines. That's what the way that the Roman soldiers worked. They'd starve their enemy to death, and starvation became a problem in this city. They were cut off from their supply line. Anatolius negotiated a peace between the soldiers and the city, causing many lives to be saved. He had been ordained a bishop at Caesarea, but was retained at Laodicea for ministry. So we do have heresies rising up, but we also have new church leaders rising up, new significant figures in church history rising up to counter heresy and to counter the atrocities of war. In this case, with Anatolius, a scholar who founded a school, but also someone who did stand up for poverty and negotiated peace. Let's go to block 3, and we look at the great persecution. In the mid-3rd century, many were allowed to practice the faith openly, says Eusebius. Governors even honored church leaders. But Eusebius tells us that out of this peace arose arrogance and sloth. So here it is, the church is enjoying some freedom for a change, and they start disintegrating from within. Factions develop within the faith community, so much so that finally God brought judgment through persecution. That's how it was interpreted in the mid-3rd century. Churches were destroyed, scriptures were burned, all due to an imperial edict under Diocletian. So now we've got Diocletian as emperor, and persecution is stronger than ever. And Diocletian says, destroy the churches down to their foundations, burn any scriptures you find. And church leaders were arrested and tortured, and any soldier who refused to obey the edict was stripped of their rank. So there was a brief period of peace and freedom for the church, and then the church divided within itself, collapsed within itself, and God brought persecution. That's the way it was interpreted in the mid-3rd century. There were martyrs in Asia Minor. Dorotheus and others were whipped, roasted, strangled, or beheaded. Families in their entirety were killed by the sword. In Phoenicia, Christians were thrown to wild beasts in stadiums. If the beast ignored them, then they were killed by the sword. In Egypt, they were scraped, racked, whipped, burned, or crucified. Even those holding government positions, if they were Christian, they were executed. So in this lesson, we get a look at a great deal of the major faith center of Alexandria. Remember, the big three were Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch. In block 1, we looked at Alexandria, that came under the harsh distress of plague, disease. But Eusebius tells us that Christians ministered to one another, and even with disease present, many would minister and bring comfort to the diseased, even in sacrifice of their own life, because then they would contract the disease, and they were considered martyrs if they died by being nurses, if they died by being compassionate and ministering to those with disease. But he said it was an apparent contrast because non-believers, the secular world, wouldn't do it. They shunned those with disease out of fear. Now, block 2, we dealt with Antioch. We dealt with Antioch, and we dealt with the Manichaean heresy. If you can imagine an individual that proclaims himself the Holy Spirit incarnate, I mean, you're claiming to be the Parakletos incarnate, even choosing 12 disciples. What a heresy. And it came out of Persia, but it was put down. Because we did have heresy rising up, we also had some good teachers rise up, says Eusebius. One being Dorotheus. Dorotheus rose up as a great teacher. That was one major instance of the Holy Spirit raising up new church leadership. And then also Anatolius started a new school in Alexandria, the school of Aristotelian tradition. So we know that the Catholic Church took up the Aristotelian tradition because Thomas Aquinas, his Summa Theologia was all about merging Christianity and Aristotelian philosophy. So now we see where it begins. It begins with Anatolius at Alexandria in his school. And then in block 3, horrible, horrible persecution continues under Diocletian as emperor. Mid-3rd century, still horrible persecution by Diocletian. So it still goes on. So we get additional teaching here in the very first church history. That's pages 263 to 299. And believe it or not, in next lesson we're going to pick up on page 300.